Hi, everyone. Welcome to our latest edition of SuperNova Commencements. I'm Kashi, Sehgal, and we have a great final show of the year for you guys today. Our guest today is in the entertainment world. She's also been in politics. And so we are going to kick things off with our career powered by data segment that is brought to us by our friends at Steppingblocks. Okay, so the degree that most people in entertainment have is a degree in the visual arts, which was interesting to me. There are just over 500,000 people in the United States that are in the entertainment industry, and 49% of those people are female. So it's pretty even as an industry. The top skills are social media, which was interesting, entertainment, video production, and TV and film. So those make sense. And you guys always ask, so the skills that make the most, which is important sometimes, new media. So that's things like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Wikipedia even, digital media, and TV ads. I guess not everybody's watching ads these days, but there's still money in them. And then a lot of people come from universities in California, like University of Southern California, USC, UCLA, and NYU. Again, LA, New York, makes sense. Okay, so that's the quick rundown of the entertainment industry. Check it out. Go to the platform. There's a lot more to learn about the industry. But now we're going to get into our guest for today. So I want to bring her on screen. Our guest today is Dana Barrett. Hey, Dana.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, so Dana is a radio and TV host. She ran for Congress from the 11th District, U.S. Congress for the 11th District. And she's done all kinds of cool things in her career. And so we are going to just learn all about Dana and what it means to navigate your life. Okay, so Dana, just tell us like where you're from, where you went to school, what'd you major in? Give us that rundown.
So I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, called Springfield, and went to Springfield High School. Go Cougars. And then I went to Cornell University for college and studied hotel administration, actually.
Very interesting. Okay, so from hotel administration, I would love to hear how you got to radio. Yes. So tell us about your career journey.
I have a very strange career journey.
I love it. The stranger, the better.
First of all, I chose hotel school because I was raised that you should have a practical money-making career. You know, I was not raised in the era of like follow your passion and, you know, if you love acting, go be an actor. If you love art, go be an artist. No, I was raised in the era of like, go make as much money as you can. You know, there's no one you can rely on but yourself, so go make it happen. And business just seemed boring, and the hotel industry seemed like a little more fun. So that was sort of why I chose that. And then when I was in college, I kind of realized that the hotel industry is it's a really hard industry. There's, you know, especially now in the middle of COVID, but it's a 24/7 industry, and the money's not great until you get way, way far into it. And so while I was in school, I sort of got connected to some technology stuff and really enjoyed that, and realized that there was more money in that, and I sort of had a knack for it. So when I got out of school, I started working in the technology sector. My first job was sort of a transition from hospitality to technology. So I worked at a systems company that put property management systems in hotels. And that's sort of how I bridged into technology. And then for
like an early Airbnb?
It was literally the company that did the software and the installations for the front desk software and the back office software. So I traveled all over the country installing and training people how to use their software in brand new hotels. It was the Ritz-Carlton chain was one of the chains that we did. And I got to stay in all these fancy hotels all over the country, which was great at, 22 years old. And then, I just sort of got more technical over time and stayed in that line of work and sort of left the hospitality part behind and just stayed in the technology side and became a self-taught programmer, and then sort of climbed my way up the management ranks and became a team leader, and then a group manager, and then a director, and ultimately a vice president. And then I started my own small web development shop and did that for a little while. But all along, I sort of knew that while I was good at that career, and there were certain aspects of it that I liked, it wasn't my passion. I didn't love it. There were people that were, reading the magazines at night, and I couldn't have cared less. I was like doing other stuff at night. So I always knew it wasn't what I wanted to do forever. And I understood at some point, I'm a ham. So I kind of knew that media and entertainment was of interest. I kind of knew that I wanted to make a bigger impact, that was something I cared about. And so I started experimenting in the media and entertainment world and literally just trying any job I could do, whether it was for free or for pay. I tried everything from stand-up comedy to community theater. I answered phones at a radio station. I did literally any odd job I could do. And I wrote, articles and submitted them. I really tried everything. And I sort of found radio by accident. Answering phones. I got a job working at WSB, answering the phone because I had a cousin who worked there in sales. And that was sort of how I first found radio. And I on the side, while I was working my corporate job that paid the bills, I ended up becoming a traffic reporter part-time on the side. And this was, 20 years ago or something like that. So I always had this little bug, this love for radio. And many years later, in yet a whole other career, I opened a bookstore. And I got invited onto someone else's radio show to talk about my bookstore. And it was a small community radio station. And I sort of said, hey, I used to work at WSB. If you guys ever need anything, let me know. And they did. So they brought me on to host their morning show. And my career's always sort of been like that. And what I've sort of learned, I know we're going to get to some of this later, but what I've sort of learned is if you stick your hand up for everything, you kind of get some interesting options and opportunities. And so I did that community radio for a while. I did podcasting before it was even a thing. And then I found my way to doing a book-related podcast, which I did for a long time. And then weirdly, that sort of led me to business and technology-related radio. It's a very long and swerving path. But I did business and technology radio for a long time and television. And then after Donald Trump got elected, I added politics into the mix and ended up doing political radio and then running for office. Does that path even make any sense?
Sure. I mean, I think what we can take from that is exactly what you said, putting yourself out there, being open to new experiences and ideas, being open to what life has in store for you. I mean, you sort of created your own destiny. I mean, you were like putting yourself out there and trying to gain skills and experiences, but you also went where you saw a path too. So, I mean,
definitely.
That's great. Okay. So let's talk about radio. I want to really get into this. So you have had several different shows. I mean, it's always been really like the Dana Barrett show, but it's evolved, right, over time. And so how did you come up with your initial show concept? Why wasn't the stand-up morning show? Like, why did it become business? How did you come up with a show concept? And how did you really navigate getting to be on-air talent?
Yeah, I mean, the path for me was kind of odd and roundabout, and I didn't really sort of come up with a show pitch and take it to somebody and say, hey, I want to do this show. I had an opportunity to work with an internet radio company that was doing business-related radio, and I never really had thought about doing that, even though by that point in my life I had a lot of business experience. I had been a vice president at a tech company. I had my own business, so I certainly knew a lot about business, but it had never occurred to me to sort of combine that with my interest in media. But I ended up having this opportunity to work part-time, managing a studio for this internet company, and hosting some shows for them. And that sort of opened my eyes to the fact that I could combine the thing I already had expertise in with the dream, the thing I wanted to do, and that would somehow be the magic, because it's very hard to work your way up in radio, like to sort of take a job as a board operator and then go from there to becoming a host. And it's a really tough industry. And coming into this industry with some other expertise is almost a better path. I know that's not always super encouraging when you're a student, because you're like, well, how am I going to do that? But you have to just try to think creatively. It could be your hobby. That's the thing. It could be the hobby you've been doing since you were in middle school. Like maybe you're a surfer, or you're like the best knitter in the world. Well, nowadays you can have a podcast about that, and get experience on air talking about whatever it is that interests you. And it just so happens for me at the time, I had a fair amount of business experience. I had some on-air experience already. And I was able to sort of combine those two things. And one of the biggest lessons I learned, and I think I learned this because it was a business show, but I would say that this is true across the board, is to network your face off, because everybody you meet is an opportunity to the next thing. And I created a network for myself, which is actually how you and I met, Kashi, at my very first internet radio station. But I kept in touch with people. I reached out afterwards. I connected. I stayed in touch, and I ended up building a really supportive network that has really helped me in my career all along the way.
Yeah, just in reference to what she just said, I really am enjoying the fact that tables are turned or reversed and roles are reversed, whatever the expression is. And I get to interview Dana because she spends so much time interviewing other people, and I've been on her show, and so I know that she's secretly critiquing my interview skills, but we'll get that download after the show.
Doing fabulously, darling.
Okay, so same question really for TV. So how did you navigate your way into TV, and did you have to audition for the show that you were on? Like, tell us a little bit about the show and the process and what it's like you were also in film, so you've done some movies.
Yeah.
So what is that like?
So what happened for me is when I made the decision to get into media, and let me be clear, like you have to do, look, there's a place for everybody in media, but for me, I knew I was interested in getting into media, into television in some way. And when it was time for me to do that, when I really got serious about it, which was about 10 years ago, I lost a bunch of weight. I changed the way I look. I made sure that I did everything in my power to be ready for these jobs, including that networking I was talking about. So with the movie roles, there were kind of two things that happened. One, I got an agent. I got professional headshots done, and I sent them to an agent. And you start sort of taking anything you can get. I did some extra work, and I did a line here, a line there for no pay at all, or for $100 or whatever. And then I was able to get a slightly better agent, or a much better agent, in fairness. And then, but you get sent to a ton of auditions for all kinds of roles. And I figured out for myself, I'm not really much of an actor, and I didn't really want to be an actor. I sort of realized pretty quickly that the craft of acting is something you really have to work on if you really want to get the parts and be great at it. And I wasn't that interested in it. So I would typically get sent out on auditions to play myself. So either one of two things, a mom or a newscaster of some kind, or a radio host, TV host, whatever. And it sort of turned out that even though I am a mom, I couldn't play a mom. So go figure. But I was able to sort of play a newscaster pretty convincingly. So I got a couple of parts playing a newscaster. But the truth is, the biggest role that I got was a movie role. When I say biggest, because it was I guess the highest paying, but it was one line in a movie, and playing a reporter number 3, I believe I was. And but I partly got it because the casting agent was someone I had networked with along the way, and she had been on my radio show to talk about the entertainment industry in Atlanta and whatever else. So when it came time to cast for this particular role, she already knew me. And so I got very nervous in auditions, and I probably still do. You put the word audition in front of it, and I turn into like a bowl of nervous blah. Whereas like if I have to just go perform and I know I already have the job, I'm cool as a cucumber. But the minute you say it's an audition, I'm like, but I think because this casting director already knew me and she knew I could do the job, and I got hired. So that networking thing, even though it doesn't seem like it would come in handy at an audition, does. And the TV show is a little bit different because same thing. I sort of networked my way to the audition. But once I had the audition, I had to do the audition just like everybody else. And I think that one felt a little more doable for me somehow because it was closer to what I had already been doing. But it's nerve-wracking. I mean, you get in there, it's just like you see on TV in a way, and you sit in a line with the 4 other people who are going for the same part you're going for, and you're all sizing each other up, and you're like, oh, dude, he's a mess. And you're practicing your lines, and you're trying to remember what you're going to do, and you're hoping you wore the right thing. And, you know, if you've never been in a TV station before, you're in the real TV station when you go for the audition, and you're on the real set, and it's nerve-wracking. They've got the real
with all the cameras, and
it is nerve-wracking, but you kind of have to just have some kind of inner mantra and take deep breaths and keep your cool, and just kind of realize that no one audition is the end. They're all just a learning experience to the next one. The best advice I can give anyone who's going to go out and do auditions is don't tell anybody, because they're going to ask you about it the next day and you're not going to want to talk about it.
That's good advice, actually.
I mean, it's true. Because I used to say, I have an audition. And then 2 weeks later, somebody would say, how was that audition? And I'd be like, I don't know, which one? What are you talking about? Because the best thing you can do if you're going for auditions is to just assume you're not going to work your ass off to get the part, do your best. But the minute you walk out of there, put it out of your mind. Don't think about what I could have done better. Just do your best and then move on, because otherwise you'll drive yourself nuts. You have to just think of auditioning as sort of part of the job of being in entertainment and not a be-all end-all.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I feel like that's also really good advice for like a big meeting or something. You walk out of a big meeting, a big
a pitch,
you know, like for business, like if you're starting your own company or something, like you just have to go in there and leave it all out there, and then
just move on.
You have to find sanity in some other way. Right. You can't keep obsessing over it.
Yeah, you just put it out of your head and move on, and just know that there's going to be there will be plenty of more opportunities. Like if this one comes through, great, and if it doesn't, the next one will.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned that you had your own, or you worked for a tech company. You also started your own business. So could you talk to us a little bit about what it was like to start your own business and how you came to the decision that it was the right time for you to do that?
Yeah, so for me, it wasn't like I always had this lifelong dream of being an entrepreneur or starting my own business. My parents were both entrepreneurs, so I had seen that in action, and I guess I had a little less fear of it than some people might. If your parents maybe both worked in corporate their whole lives and you never really saw anybody do that, it can be a little bit scarier. But I happened to be working in the tech sector at the time, and I was working for a .com startup, so that gives you a clue as to when it was. And my boss, who I still have a wonderful relationship with, and who is an amazing businessman, wasn't really, I was part of the management team, and he had to cut our salaries. And at the time, I had a young child at home. I was a single mom. I was divorced, and I just knew I couldn't really afford to take a pay cut. And so I sort of went to him and I said, I can't take a pay cut, but what I could do is start my own business and make you my first client. And he said, okay. So that's what we did. And I started a web development shop, and he was my first client. And I went back through my Rolodex, and I called everybody I could think of. And
by the way, no one younger than no one that was born in the last 25 years knows what a Rolodex is.
Honestly, I didn't even have a Rolodex then. I just used that word to mean my list of contacts. Is that better? My contacts.
A little black book.
My little black book. Does anyone know what that is?
I don't know.
Yeah, I went through all my old contacts from prior projects and things I had worked on, and just let people know I was starting my own business, and these were the services I was going to do. And I ended up pulling a few decent sized clients, and that was enough to get my business going. But I remember, so I started out with maybe 2 or 3 clients, and just myself. I was the business, and ultimately I hired contractors when I needed to for bigger projects. And it was a small business, but it was great. And I remember getting my first big check. At the time, I think it was a $9,000 check. And I remember going to pick it up at the client's office and kind of walking out of there it was a bright sunny day. I'll never forget. And I was holding this check thinking, oh my God, this is the most money I've held in my hand at one time. It was crazy.
Awesome. It's a great feeling.
Yeah. But it was, but I had to learn all the things about, setting up the accounting systems for the business, and, invoicing and billing and hiring and payroll and, all the things. And I just sort of, figured it out, at the time.
How did you have the confidence to make a decision to start a business and know that you needed to figure all this out? Is that a confidence that you just developed over time, or, because not a lot of people, or not everybody, has the ability to just step out and say, I'm going to learn as I go, which is a very important life skill. How do you feel like you built that throughout your life?
One of the biggest, it's a good question. And I think, I come from a family with a couple of entrepreneurs as parents. My mom was an amazing role model. She really I saw her go through multiple career changes and just kind of always get back up. She'd fall down, something would go wrong, and she just would figure out how to get back up and move forward. And I think that I just, for some reason, have always believed that I could figure it out. I had enough confidence in my brain and in my ability to think that I could figure it out. And I think that is probably the biggest piece of advice that I can give people is don't be afraid, because that fear it's not based on anything real. And the biggest mistakes I've made, I think, is not being brave, is staying somewhere too long in a bad job, and not having the courage to leave because I was afraid that there might not be another thing. And the times when I've been the most successful, like that story I just told, I was forced essentially to start my own business. My boss had to downsize. He was going to cut my pay by 20%, and I couldn't afford that. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't feel like I had a choice. And other times I've been fired from a couple of things, and that forced me on to the next thing. So, I remember that always, and say, if I had only just been courageous enough. In my radio life, there's an example, which is that when I started talking politics on the radio, I got canned from the station I was at because I was doing a business and tech show, and I started talking politics, and I knew it was going to be a risk, and it was, and I ultimately lost my gig. But I had been trying for 2 years before that to get a bigger, better gig, and I didn't have the courage to really push as hard as I should have because I had a bird in hand. But when I lost the bird in hand, I pushed a lot harder, and I ended up at a bigger, better radio station, with a better gig. And if I had just had the courage to do that a year before or 2 years before, I might have been that much further along. So I think you have to believe in yourself. I'm also really stubborn. So every time someone tells me it can't be done, I'm like,
It's the best motivator. Yeah. Turn that negative energy into something really positive, because it can work for you. Okay. You've been in the tech world. I have to ask you, how have you seen it evolve over time? Maybe in Atlanta or just in general, what have you seen as one of the biggest shifts?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity in technology. I think it used to be seen as sort of like a, nerds only, like engineers and money people maybe, and that's it. And now I feel like there's so many creative jobs in technology. There's so many ways to get trained. Like, you don't have to have a 4-year degree in IT in order to get into the industry. If you're not sure about a particular skill set, you can just go take a course. You can take a course online and learn something and get into it just as easily. There's a lot more entrepreneurship, I think, than when I got started. Starting small tech companies wasn't a thing. I mean, you got a job working for somebody else's tech company. Now you can sort of have an idea and go for it on your own. Look, everything is technology now. That's the other thing. I mean, that wasn't true when I was coming up. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, and there's still a lot of opportunity for diversity too. So if you're, female or a person of color or both, this is a great time to get into the tech sector because companies are desperately looking for you. And there's still a lot of money to be made. So that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that like the shift to smaller businesses and entrepreneurship. I mean, because technology, you're saying, it's been around for a while, but the emphasis is maybe in different places.
Well, I think the cooler jobs you can still get. There's lots of big company jobs also, but the cooler jobs are the smaller companies and where you can really have an impact. And the other thing, I think is because of the people that are listening and watching your show, Kashi. I mean, you guys are demanding that companies be socially minded and that they're giving back and that they, are emphasizing the right things and treating employees fairly and all of that. That wasn't the case in my day either. I mean, we sort of had to do whatever we got. And now, technologists are in high demand. So you guys have a little bit more power, and I applaud that. I wish that
that conscious consumerism.
Yeah.
Good thing. Okay, so you ran for office.
I did.
And, is this something, you said that it evolved. So how did you arrive at the decision that you were just going to take the plunge and become a candidate? And also, it put you in the public eye, I feel like, in a different way, right? You've always been in the public eye, but is it different being in radio and TV and being in the public eye that way versus being in the public eye as a candidate?
Yeah. So let me start with the decision to run, first of all. So, ultimately, I didn't run for office because I always wanted to be a politician or I wanted to hold some kind of political office. In fact, that's probably the furthest thing from where my dreams were. But I did know early on, as I mentioned, that I wanted to have an impact, and I had felt like I was doing that in radio. But I started to realize as I was doing my political talk radio show that I was talking to a bubble and that the bubble believed what I believed. And, there's only so much you can do, to be honest, as a left-wing talk radio host. That genre is pretty well, to the right. And so, while I enjoyed that and I love radio and I, hope that I get to do it again at some point because it's really a lot of fun. But I sort of realized that I wasn't necessarily having as much of an impact as I wanted to. And the more I saw the country get divided and divided and divided and so polarized, the more I sort of felt like bigger actions needed to be taken. But I still probably never would have run. I just happened to move. And I moved a few miles away from where I was living. And with the gerrymandering in our state, in Georgia, I landed in a congressional district that I was sort of shocked to be in because I'm just down in this very little bottom corner of this district that went way up into the northwest quadrant of Atlanta and the metro area. And when I looked up the congressman, I just was sort of like, no, I'm not okay with this guy. And I'd like everything else I do. I was really into researching at that point. I was talking national politics 2 hours a day on the radio. And, when I looked up this guy's record, I was not impressed. And when I looked up, who was running against him and who had challenged him in the past, I saw that he really hadn't been challenged. And then I did a lot of inward soul searching. And I looked at my own network and I thought, you know what? I think I know enough people and I have enough of a start with a brand name and a network to raise money and all that I can give this a go. And so I really did it so that I could call him out and, bring his sort of misdeeds, in my opinion, to the forefront. And I knew it was a long shot from the beginning. It was never like, I'm going to just breeze in there and win this office. And of course, you always want to win when you run for something. But the greatest likelihood was that I was not going to win. And so the goal was not only to win, but really to make sure these issues were being talked about and that people were motivated to vote and to understand the issues at a deeper level and all of that. So, I feel like I accomplished what I set out to do.
Success can look like so many different things. And so if you run for something, success does not always equal I won. I mean, that's a nice outcome, but there's so many other positives that come along the way. So
right. And to answer your second question, which was just sort of how does it feel to be in the spotlight as a politician or a candidate versus as a media personality or even a successful business person, right? They're all different. And when you're in the spotlight, so to speak, as a successful business person, you have always to worry about the constituencies of your potential clients, your existing clients, your potential former or future bosses, your board of directors, that kind of thing. And so you always have to be sort of careful about what you say and who you say it to because of those constituencies. When you're in media, you have to take all of the reins off to some extent. Certainly when you're in doing what I was doing, which was being a commentator on talk radio. Now, if you're a news person, it's different. But as a commentator, my job was to be unfiltered. My job was to make people mad, to get people fired up. So I could say whatever I wanted to some extent, and that was the goal. And so I got really comfortable. First of all, I'm sort of an oversharer. So I got really comfortable sort of sharing my own life stories, but also my opinions. And then, you go to the world of politics and it's more like the world of corporate, and maybe even more so, because now all of a sudden I sort of got afraid to speak on Facebook Live as an example, because what if I said the wrong thing? If someone will take it out of context and they'll make it seem like I'm something I'm not, right? And so all of a sudden I had this couple months when I began where I had been speaking live on the radio every day for years, but all of a sudden when I announced the candidacy, I had this like, oh God, now everything I say is going to be used against me. Eventually I got over it. And what I sort of realized is you still have to just do it and be as authentic as possible. One of the things I hate the most when you watch politicians is when they just seem so rehearsed when they're asked a question and they don't answer it. So I really made an effort throughout my candidacy to just be authentic. And I can't tell you how many interviews I did over the course of the campaign where I would say, well, my campaign manager is probably going to be mad at me for this, and I would just answer the question.
But people, I think, probably responded really well to that.
Yeah.
That authenticity, right? It may not be the correct answer or the answer they want to hear, but I think people surely respond to at least you trying to answer a question that they genuinely have.
Yeah. And the other thing I found out, and this is a good tip for public speaking too, if you're too rehearsed, you mess up. If you're more authentic, you're less likely to mess up. Because if you're speaking from knowledge and from the heart and not having memorized every exact word and placement of the word and intonation of the word, that's when you trip yourself up. You're standing up there and people are watching you and you miss the word "the," and then you panic and then you mess up the rest of it.
Yeah.
Right? You're just
good advice.
Speaking. So the best you can, if you have to public speak, internalize your content as best you can, like memorize the order of things, but not word for word, and practice. But I feel like the more you're just knowledgeable and speaking from your heart, the better off you are. Also, don't be afraid to look foolish. I have to say that I have made myself look foolish so many times, and people love that. Like nobody's going to hold that against you if you trip or you stumble on a word, or if you handle it like you're not mortified, then they're not mortified. That's always been
because everybody in life at some point trips or does something crazy. And it's okay. I mean, it makes you human.
Remember what was her name? Jennifer Lawrence or somebody wasn't it, she was the one who tripped like up the steps at a Hollywood event or on the red carpet or something.
Or no, wasn't it like Taylor Swift who tripped up the stairs? Somebody tripped up the stairs.
Lawrence, and it was actually up the steps to get an award.
Oh, yeah. I think it was her.
It was like, everyone loved it. Like, everyone loved her because she just was like, oh, well, and kept going. Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, because it's a real moment.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Authenticity wins every time.
Every time.
I mean, theoretically, unless your authenticity is
right. If you're a jerk,
right. Well, we won't get into that. Okay. Lots of questions. So let's just dig in. So Christina wants to know, the simple question: podcast versus radio? Question mark.
Okay, they're very different. I know they seem like they're the same, but they're really not. Podcasts are much more rehearsed. The beauty of live radio, and the reason I love it so much, is because you're expected to mess up. It's live. It's daily. You're dealing with whatever comes in. It's a lot of fun, but obviously, as a media or as a medium, it's not in its best moment right now, especially with COVID, because not nearly as many people are in their cars, and lots of people who are in their cars these days listen to podcasts. So from an opportunity standpoint, there's a lot more opportunity in podcasting, and podcasting has a lower barrier to entry. Like, you can start a podcast in your living room. So I would say if it's an area you're interested in, there you go.
Bedroom. Yeah.
But I would say if it's something you're interested in, and also nowadays, the downside, I guess, is you have to, like, everybody has cameras on when they're podcasting. So radio in the old days, you could roll in your pajamas with your hair sticking up and no one knew. But I will say, if you want to do a podcast, get your, was it Malcolm Gladwell that said you have to have 10,000 hours of practice to be really good at something? So just start podcasting now on whatever interests you. Get interviewed on someone else's podcast and watch them, and just start doing it. So I would say getting into it is easier if you're a podcaster, but keep radio as an option, because there are good opportunities in radio, and it can build your, they can feed off each other. Like, I was doing radio for a long time. Like I said, I did podcasting before it was cool, and then I sort of stopped because I couldn't make any money at it. That's the downside of podcasting, is it's how do you make money? There's not a lot of podcasts that make real money. But anyway, I was doing radio, and then I got the opportunity to do a podcast for a bigger podcast network, because I already had a name in radio. So I say start with podcasting, but keep both options open.
Mm-hmm. Doug has a related question about, I guess he's starting a podcast.
Okay.
And he wants to know if you have any advice or tips that he needs to know as he gets started. You sort of touched on that a little bit, but.
Yeah, podcasting, I would say, look, know your audience, build your audience by networking. So, if you have a specialty, if you're doing a podcast around gaming or knitting or whatever it is, make sure you put out other content for that group of people as well. And as much as you can to, like, woo those people to you, follow other people that are doing it. And in terms of the content itself, don't make the mistake of assuming you can just turn on a mic and talk. Plan your show. Plan the amount of time you're going to be on. Plan where the conversation is going to go. I would not practice it word for word, because you do want to be authentic. But every day for my radio show, for my 2-hour-a-day radio show, I probably spent 6-8 hours on prep. So, like, know your material, have bullet points of where you're planning to go, have guests lined up, whatever it is you want to do, but just plan. Because the worst is when people just put the mics on and just talk without anything.
Yeah.
Some people are great at that. Or, by the way, some people, it seems like that's what they're doing, but it's not. They planned.
Yeah. And to your point, do not write out a script and then just read it.
No, absolutely.
That never sounds normal and conversational.
Right. And even interviewing, I would say, like, when I first started doing interviews on a podcast, I would make a list of 10 questions, let's say. But you always want to make sure you're listening to what the answer to the question is, and you can go off script. Like, don't just go to your next question because that's what you wrote on the paper. Listen to the person who's answering and go from there. And if you don't need to go back to your questions at all, don't. Like, you don't have to stick to the plan. The conversation is rolling without that, then great. The worst is when you see somebody just, oh, okay, and my next question is, and they haven't even listened to the answer prior.
Okay, I'm thinking back to what I just did, but I think I handled that pretty well. I threw you some stuff off script. Okay. Melissa wants to know, is it harder to do TV or radio?
It is much different, and I think there's a lot more pressure to do TV. And I think TV is harder. There's a lot more opportunity on camera than there is just doing audio. But with TV, when you go to do radio, it's like you and a producer maybe, or maybe two producers in a booth. Nobody else is really looking at you. When you go to do TV, there's people everywhere. There's lighting, there's cameramen, there's a lot of pressure to look a certain way, to not, sit weird or jiggle around too much. It's not just your performance anymore, it's everything. So I found it to be more pressure. Once you get used to it, it's doable. Both are very doable, but I found TV to be harder and more tiring for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Devin wants to know, what lesson do you wish you had learned earlier?
Well, the networking one for sure. I didn't really start building I met tons of people in the course of my career, but I didn't really start staying in touch and building my network until I was in my early 40s. And I wish I had done it 20 years before. So I know it seems like a pain in the neck. And I would say this, I have some younger siblings who I've said, you got to network. And they sort of didn't listen to me. I would say nothing else. Link into the person you just met, or take their business card and type it into a spreadsheet somewhere or something, so that, when you need a network, you have it. You don't have to send people goofy notes. Don't overdo it. Don't overthink it. But also, if you meet somebody that just seems cool, even if they're 20 years older than you, or they're in a completely different profession, ask them for coffee. Don't be afraid to just treat people like humans, because I guarantee you I'm a few years older than all of you, and I'm sure I would have coffee if we weren't in quarantine.
Have a virtual coffee.
Yeah, but I think this, don't be afraid to just say, hey, I really enjoyed what you had to say. Here's the other thing. When you're networking, especially when you're young, don't just ask people to help you who you've never met. That's not a valid ask. Ask if you can volunteer for them. Ask if you can intern for them. Offer them something. And I've had a lot of younger people say to me, well, I don't have anything to offer. Yes, you do. You have your time. You have your social network. You have things to offer. So don't just ask and expect. Offer and then ask.
I love that. Yeah, that's such great advice. What can you do for somebody else? And then don't do with expectation either. Right.
And also, if you're reaching out to somebody, I get these people reaching out to me on LinkedIn all the time who say, I love your podcast. It's no, you don't. You didn't listen to my podcast. I can tell by what you're writing. And, I haven't done a podcast episode in over a year and a half. And so people are like, oh, no, I'm not podcasting right now. Profile and you can see what I'm doing. So, you have to do a little homework before you reach out to somebody, especially if they're a few rungs up the ladder from you.
Yep. Question, I guess, based on the question I asked you earlier, isn't politics entertainment? This is from Brett.
Isn't politics entertainment? That's an interesting question. Sadly, I think it is. That's why I think it's going so poorly. Yeah, you do have to have
news is also entertainment these days. They kind of go hand in hand.
Right, because with news, it's all about ratings, which is a form of what any TV show has to deal with. I think you do have to have a lot of the same skill set to do to be in politics as you do to be in the media. That is true, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Neil wants to know, what is the worst job you have ever had? And I'm going to, since we're at the end of the year, put a positive spin. What is also the best job you've ever had?
Okay. The worst job I ever had was I was working in the technology sector. By the way, I've done all kinds of little odd jobs. I ran a teleprompter. I was a waitress when I was in college. I sold shoes when I was in high school. I've done a lot of crazy stuff over the years, right? But when I was in my technology career, I was really desperate to get out of the place I was working. Not because it was horrible, but I had been there for 6 years or something like that. And I wasn't going anywhere anymore. I could feel that there was nowhere else to go in that company for me. And I was just ready to move on. And so I went through the interview process at another tech company. And this is where I'm just going to say, trust your gut always, because something in my gut was like, I don't love these people. I don't love this company. But it was like a mile from my house and the pay was good. And so I took the job. And I got there on the first day and they took me to now keep in mind, this was to be a programmer. Okay. And they took me to my cube and there was no computer in it. And they were like, well, we don't have a computer for you yet. So here's a manual. And they sat me with a manual to read the manual. And they didn't even show me where the restroom was or anything. They just left me in a cube with a binder for like hours. Didn't introduce me to anyone. Like by the end of day 2, I was in tears driving home. Like worst mistake I ever made. By day 4, I had already started looking for another job. Sadly, it took me several months to get another job before I could get out of there. But it was just not good. So
follow your gut. Don't take a job just because it
better
feels like
doesn't always mean, or a better location or a cool product. Like if the people don't feel right to you, your gut knows. If it's not gelling, don't talk yourself into it.
Okay, and best job.
Best job I ever had. Probably political talk radio. I mean, I just love doing that so much. I think there's a concept in, I guess it's psychology. I don't really know, but there's a concept of being in a state of flow. And it's like sometimes for people you can get into a state of flow just emptying the dishwasher, which, or whatever it is. If there's some kind of physical chore that can get you in a state of flow where the time just goes by and you get the task done and you don't even realize how much time it was. Well, that's how I always felt when I was doing radio. I just loved doing it. I felt like I was in my element. I wasn't watching the clock to see how much longer. I just loved it. And I think you want to find that in your life. So whatever it is, you want to be doing, look, you're never going to love every aspect of every job. That's impossible. There are parts of talk radio that were a pain in the tushy. But if most of the job feels good and you're not miserable checking your watch every 10 seconds, you're probably doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's good advice. Okay. Angela wants to know, she has a few ideas for shows for both TV and for podcasts. Is pitching a podcast different than pitching for TV?
Yes. Pitching for TV is harder, I'd still say, because it's more expensive, first of all, to pitch for TV. If you want to try to put a pilot together, you've got to get cameras and cameramen. And if you do something that's sort of not great quality, people can tell. If you want to pitch a podcast, first of all, it's the cost of entry is just way simpler. Because again, you can do a pilot episode, with a couple of mics in your living room or your basement or whatever, or probably even on your phone. And there's probably more people to pitch to. There's this, I personally feel like anybody can turn on their mic and make a podcast at home. Same thing with, self-publishing, right? You can write a book and publish it yourself. But if you want to start to really move into that world as a career, then you want to pitch to an existing podcast network. So the best thing you can do is look at their existing shows, see what they've already got going, see where there's an opening, like if they're not doing a whole genre on the whole, they're probably not going to want yours if it's a genre they haven't even touched. But if it's a genre they're starting to touch, or they might have 1 or 2 shows and you see an angle that they haven't already hit, that's a good way to craft your pitch, right? Like I see that you're doing women in business, but you're not actually doing women of color in business, or you're not doing women who change careers, or, find some niche that isn't already being covered.
Yeah, that's a good advice. Jenny wants to know, based on the podcast route, what are some of your favorite podcasts?
I'm kind of a newsy sort of person. So, the Daily New York Times podcast. I love Malcolm Gladwell's podcast. And then I have to say, and I'm not going to list specific ones because truth be told, I don't remember the names, but I had a moment over the COVID where I got really into some of the fiction podcasts that are out there, where they're just like the serial fiction ones. They're kind of creepy and sci-fi-ish. I thought some of those were pretty cool. I think there's a lot of interesting things going on in podcast world. My own podcast is called Bizography.
There you go.
On the iHeart Podcast Network. It was kind of like the history of iconic businesses. It was a lot of fun to do, but that's a perfect example of finding a niche. That was like they had business podcasts, they had history podcasts, but they didn't have something that combined them both. And be open-minded. Like when I went to pitch to them, I pitched like 5 different ideas, and that's the one that they liked the best. It was not the one that I liked the best, but that's the one that they liked the best, and they picked it up. So just be open-minded when you go to pitch.
Felix wants to know what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given.
Best piece of advice I've ever been given. That's a tough one. I don't take advice very well. No, I'm kidding. I think I've sort of probably regurgitated a lot of it to you all as advice already. But I think being authentic, is right up there. Not being afraid is right up there. Get up when you fall down is right up there. And I've probably picked these things up from other people along the way. I didn't come up with them on my own. Believe in yourself for sure. But also have some humility, You know what? Here, I'll tell you what. One of the things that always stuck with me, and I don't even remember who told me this, but know that most people are paying a lot less attention to you than you think they are. So if you just did something embarrassing, probably nobody noticed except you. If you had spinach in your teeth at a job interview, chances are no one noticed but you. So don't overthink every little last thing you're doing because no one else is.
Yeah, I don't know where that piece of advice actually originates from, but I love that little tidbit. It's so useful. I have to remind myself of that sometimes,
It's like when you, like, this is a silly example, but when you think about like, oh, I better not wear that outfit because I wore it last time I saw so-and-so. Well, let me tell you something. So-and-so doesn't remember what you wore. And here's proof. Try to think back on any one of your friends and what they wore last time you saw them. I guarantee you can't remember.
Unless it was really crazy and outlet.
I just saw Kashi a few days ago and I could not tell you what she was wearing. I do remember her very cute shoes, but other than that, no idea.
They were kind of cute. Okay. Last question. So I don't know if you all know this, but Dana actually has a book club. She's had many book clubs over the years and owned a bookstore called, what was it called?
It was called Coffee by the Book.
See, super cute name. So Robin wants to know, do you have any books on life that you would recommend?
Books on life?
Or just books in general?
I read a lot of fiction, and lately I've been reading a lot of like escapist fiction, to be honest, because who doesn't need a mental break right now in the middle of all this politics and pandemic, yada yada. But I will say this, that I know I've already mentioned Malcolm Gladwell like 3 times, but I'm a huge Malcolm Gladwell fan. Everything he's written, I've loved. And there are some good life lessons in a lot of what he writes. Daniel Pink is another one whose books I really like, that's sort of in and around business and self and whatever, but bigger, but really good writer, really interesting stuff. There's a book about habits. I can't think of the name of it at the moment. Wait, let me see. Well, there's 2. One is called Stick With It by Sean Young. Very good book about sort of how to change habits, make habits. Natalie Nino's book on, sort of how to move forward in your career. It's called Leapfrog. It's an excellent book. There's just a few. You can see that I'm a big reader. That's just one stack of what I have. But yeah, those are some good ones.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. All right. So we're going way over time. So I am just going to call it. We have a lot more questions, but we all have things to do at the end of the year. So
back, Kashi, can I tell you?
Yeah, we'll just have a part 2. That'll be awesome. Okay. So everyone, you know the drill. Sign up for the newsletter. Go to the website, supernovacommemncements.com. Find us on the web. If you sign up for the newsletter, you're going to get things like, not offers, but like grants, scholarships, internships, all these opportunities. So head on over to the website. Make sure you do that. This is our last show of the year. We're closing it out strong, I would say. So there's no one next week. We will be back in January. Dana, do you have any closing thoughts for us, for our students?
I mean, yes. First of all, bye-bye to 2020. See ya. Wouldn't want to be there. I feel like 2021 is going to be a great year. You know, just head into it with a lot of confidence. Don't be afraid. Reach out to people. Network your little faces off. And I know you guys are all going to be, if you're listening to Kashi's show, you're all going to be huge successes, obviously. So happy holidays, happy New Year, and may 2021 be way better for all of us.
Hear, hear. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us again. Students, have a great week. You are either taking finals or you're close to finals. So best of luck with all the testing. Have a great holiday. Remember, it's a blessing to be a blessing. So be kind to everyone as you go throughout your day today and through the holiday. And I will see y'all in 2021. Bye.